long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Duve media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I'm your host, Constant Reader Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by King Newbie. It's Matt Freeman.
Matt, right here and now. Matt.
Oh, I get it. It's like Wolf.
Matt. Yes.
You gonna do that like the whole show?
Yeah. Right here and now. God, pound it.
This week on the show, the Talisman continues as we conclude Part 2, The Road of Trials, by covering chapters 15 through 19. A lot of stuff happens in this week's reading, but of course, the biggest thing we're all thinking about is the introduction of everyone's favorite character, Wolf. Matt, what did you think of this week's reading?
Well, as much as I've been enjoying the book so far, I think the introduction of the character of Wolf sort of stepped things up a notch for me. This was just delightful and fun. And then it takes this amazing turn into being extremely creepy. And I just love everything about it. I wrote a lot of notes this week.
That's good. I'm glad. I'm very glad. And I can't wait to talk to you about this because I agree with you. I say this further in the script, but I'll go ahead and just put it out here now. I think, and this is a untested opinion, I have no numbers to back this up, but I think when people think fondly of this book, when they look back and remember their experience with this book, 90% of what they're remembering, I think, is the character of Wolf, because he's just so fun and endearing and delightful and creepy and everything that makes a fun Stephen King character. And you know, this is not the first time or the last time we'll see a character like Wolf in a Stephen King story. He likes these kind of, you know, not all up there in the head, but really large and intimidating, but also very kind and sweet characters that have specific sayings that they repeat over and over again.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'll keep an eye out.
You're not going to miss him. We haven't seen exactly some like Wolf yet. I mean, we've seen kind of the very kind sidekick characters. I'm thinking of Shimi, and I think some of the Runt people from Wolves of the Cala kind of fall into this as well, like because they're impressively large and intimidating visually, but then you kind of realize they're just sweethearts underneath all that.
You know what's funny is I kept as I was thinking about this question, I kept thinking about Hodor. I mean, which it's funny because it's an example of the trope, but it's not Stephen King. But my brain refuses to accept that it's not Stephen King for some reason.
That would definitely be a Stephen King character for sure.
Yeah.
All right, Matt, let's get right into it. We begin this week with chapter 15, titled Snowball Sings. Our reading this week begins with Jack bumping into a blind man singing outside the mall. We learn his name is Snowball, but it's Speedy, right? Or, well, I mean, it's not Speedy. Is it Speedy, Matt?
I think it's Snowball Parkus. I think it's Speedy's twinner, and how that works is left to be figured out.
I love the ambiguity of it because at like 6 different times during the conversation that Jack has with I almost called him Speedy, with Snowball, he reiterates over and over again he's not this. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's not this person, and then he kind of just winks at him. Sometimes actual literal winks and sometimes just like verbal dialogue winks. It's a delightful little thing that you're just not sure of the magic that's operating underneath all this stuff.
I figure there's magic going on. Like, this is not literally just a random guy. But you know how all the mechanics of twinners work is still being held from us, actually.
Yeah, and we're going to have to kind of pick at that a little bit this week because I think that is going to get a little more complicated.
All right.
So not Speedy and Jack encounter those damn teens again, Matt, who say some really nasty things about our character, and then they push Jack, who in turn accidentally spills not Speedy's a cup of coins. So in case you didn't like these kids already enough, here you go. Now you hate them.
I should have formally predicted that there would be a run-in because it didn't feel like we were done with them last time.
But I want to talk about this particular passage here with them because it says, Mr. All-American and the 3 little princes were already moving on. Jack stared after them and felt the now familiar impotent hate. This was how it felt being on your own, just young enough to be at everyone's mercy and to be anyone's meat. anyone from a psychotic like Osmond to a humorless old Lutheran like Elbert Palamountain, whose idea of a pretty fair workday was to slog and squelch through the gluey fields for 12 hours during a steady cold downpour of October rain, and to sit bolt upright in the cab of his International Harvester truck during lunch hour, eating onion sandwiches and reading from the Book of Job. So, I mean, first of all, I love this idea of this now familiar impotent hate. You know, this idea that like he feels this incredible emotional power against these people, but is really honestly powerless to do anything to them. It's exhausting. It's part of his, you know, like I think a lot of this conversation is him just saying, hey, I know I'm on this road of trials and I'm fucking sick of it. I'm sick of these trials. And I know this is just another trial of mine and I'm sick of it.
Yeah, that's true. There seems to be, you know, this part of the book just pushing him more and more toward a breaking point. And, you know, I don't know. We've long since passed the point where this was a fun, delightful adventure. It almost immediately wasn't a fun, delightful adventure. It has sucked tremendously, and yeah, he's miserable, and he, you know, as we're going to see in a minute, he actually thinks about quitting and just turning back.
Yeah. I do love this little bit of information we get about Albert Palamountain, who is a character we never actually met. We never actually saw this part of the story where Jake. I'm going to do that a lot, and I've probably done it already. But Jack, I meant Jack, not Jake.
Yeah.
Jack spends like 3 days on this farm working to get a little bit of cash before he heads into town to go to this mall. And even this, Matt, even this was miserable, and even this has this guy who is like pushing these kids. I'm assuming it's about a bunch of other kids along with Jake. Damn it. I'm going to do an episode now, Jack.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I almost wrote it several times this week too.
Yeah.
Okay, but no, I want to talk about this actually because I never made the Jack Jake mistake until this week in the notes. And you haven't made the Jack Jake mistake verbally until this week. So
yeah,
why is it that we're both thinking about Jake suddenly? Is there something in the story that's priming that, you think?
I think interesting. I don't know. I do think there is a little bit of, maybe it's just because I have this particular passage on the mind, but this exhaustion at the cards he's been dealt by the world, it feels very Jake-like to me. Like, and I'm speaking of specific Jake going insane in the early parts of the Wastelands, and he's just like exhausted and tired and doesn't understand what's going on and why. And I feel a lot of, you know, spirituality between those two characters in those moments.
He's becoming a bit of a more darker and jaded character, like Jake was maybe, and that's reminding us subconsciously, because I definitely feel like they're closer together this week. Yeah.
No, I totally agree with that. It's probably not an accident we made those mistakes already here, just 10 minutes into the show.
Yeah.
So Jack convinces himself that this is indeed Speedy, despite what he says, and confesses everything he's been feeling to the man. He says right here, he admits it, that he's on a road of trials, but he has been tried enough. Snowball tells him what you kind of figured out last week, Matt, which is that, is everything that you're putting on yourself really all your fault, Jack? Like, is the deaths that you're putting on yourself really your fault? And I love that he's like playing his guitar and singing to him as he's doing this. So he sings this song that says, maybe you're running, boy, and maybe you're being chased. Maybe you just a little off base. Might be someone else getting onto your case. And so basically what he's saying is, this is not your responsibility. Someone else did this. That stop putting these deaths on you. Stop putting this stuff on your shoulders.
Yeah, I love the musical delivery. Obviously, despite the fact that it's a book and we can't really hear it, you kind of feel like you can almost. Yeah, it makes the whole exchange so much more delightful and dynamic, and it kind of cheers up Jack a bit, which is good.
Yeah.
I mean, I became even more confident that the earthquake wasn't Jack's fault when we later observe how violent Sloat's method of ingress into the territories is.
Yeah, and I think the big reveal later at how Jerry Bledsoe actually died puts another nail in the coffin of, this wasn't your fault, Jack, because it's not that his father and Morgan Sloat just flipped over and just the act of them flipping is what killed this guy. No, Morgan had a terrible totem and he left it carelessly, a totem that had power and energy in it, and Jerry Bledsoe came across it unfortunately. So
Mm.
yeah, that's we don't learn exactly what caused this freak earthquake in New York, but if Morgan Sloat was also in New York and chasing him, maybe he did it, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe.
And then there's this part, Matt, which I think is really worth studying in our overarching, tower verse and perhaps king verse mindset here. This is again Speedy / Snowball talking here. Could even be, the blind man remarked, hitting a dark minor D chord on his box, that all things soive the Lord, just like my mommy told me and your mama might have told you, if she was a Christian lady. Could be we think we're doing one thing, but are really doing another. Good book says all things, even those that seem evil, soive the Lord. What do you think, boy? So obviously sub out Lord here and sub in beam, and we're in business, right? All things serve the beam.
I'm so glad you pulled this out for us to talk about, because it really neatly connects up with the Dark Tower mythos. With the, and I think it links the Dark Tower mythos with the conception of Christianity,
sure,
that Stephen King has sort of demonstrated throughout all of his other books, starting with Salem's Lot, but expanding out from there. God, the Lord, he works in mysterious ways. Bad things happen, but in the end, everything comes around all right. There's this, a cosmic grace that redeems everything, sure, and evil always eventually destroys itself. All this applies to both the way that King writes about Christianity and the way that he writes about, the beams or the tower or Ka.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
This passage seems to connect everything up better than I think anything else that we've ever seen.
I totally agree. And I want to reiterate, because we've kind of talked about this before. I don't think that this overarching understanding of the way King's universe works takes anything away from the individual character choices and character moments in the story, right? Like this idea, like just because there might be some level of higher power determinism going on here doesn't mean characters' individual choices and their individual agency doesn't matter in this stuff. I think it does. I think it's just even when you are making those choices, you are still serving that greater power in some way, despite the fact that you are indeed the one making the choice. And perhaps if you make the wrong choice, then things need to be shifted around to ensure that things end up working out eventually anyway. I mean, we've kind of seen this. We've seen the tower tap people to need to come in and do things. Like, I think we saw that beautifully in Insomnia, right? That like someone did something they weren't supposed to do, and now we've got to recruit someone new to set these things correct.
Yeah, Insomnia seems to be so far the book that has been the most explicit about like there are powers that are above what we are usually seeing, that are, and again, even that wasn't like, oh yes, everything is just deterministic. It was pretty clear that there's order and there's chaos and people have choice, but the agents that kind of are above us are kind of rearranging things to try to make, I don't know, what you just said.
This is, I mean, the only reason I bring this up is because this is a common complaint I've seen leveled at Stephen King from some critics, is that, things tend to work out and we're always told, regardless of the book, there's always this moment where it feels like there's this higher power, making its presence known in the world, and people feel that demeans the character's individual choices, their individual agency, and I just don't see it that way. I see it as part and parcel of the same thing, that as it says here, like even everything you do serves the Lord or the beam or the powers that be in some way, even if it doesn't feel like it does in the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like trying to make it seem like that takes away agency is just it doesn't really move me very much. I mean, we've talked plenty about the idea that like I don't really think that free will exists in the sense that
Sure.
Philosophers use the term, but that doesn't mean that I am not like making choices, because making choices is like a subjective internal experience. It doesn't matter that I couldn't have actually made any other different choice, because I still had to go through the process of making the choice.
Sure.
And I still should be held responsible for it, and I still should be given credit for it, and the same applies to fictional characters.
I think it almost even applies more to fictional characters, because I think the concept and idea of does free will exist doesn't matter in the concept of a story,
right?
Because no, they're not. It's not a real character.
It double doesn't exist in stories.
Right. And so the idea that it doesn't matter if this was the only choice the character was ever going to make, as long as it feels like it was a difficult choice for them to make, and I think that the King does that well. Even if this was the way things were always going to go, it was the way it was always going to happen, it still feels like there is indecision and choice and power in those moments of indecision and choice. Yeah. And I think that's all that matters.
Yeah, we just want to be convinced that the character struggled, fundamentally, and King does a good job at that.
Yeah. So then Not Speedy begins chastising Jack for all the wine he's been drinking. He calls it Poiple Jesus that he smells on his breath. I don't think we've quite discussed this idea yet, Matt, that the magic potion that Jack has been given to flip back and forth through the territories is alcoholic. It is wine. It is cheap, terrible wine. And it is this alcohol that allows him to enter this magical world of story. And so I just wanted to propose to you, what do you think of this idea, this metaphor, as the territories and flipping to the territories as being intoxicated in some way?
That's really funny because I hadn't thought about it at all. It is kind of funny to imagine that each swig of the bottle has actually just started a psychedelic fugue, and has not actually involved teleportation at all, which it's stupid. It's obviously not a valid reading, but it's funny. But I mean, being drunk as a metaphor, I think that works really well, because being drunk is an escape. Resorting to substances is a way of making highs higher and lows lower too, I suppose. If you can't cope with normal, boring, grinding, monotonous reality, and I guess you could say something like, having your mother, your father die, and now your mother has a terminal illness. That's the sort of mundane, horrible thing that a person might want to drink to escape from.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not saying like, oh, that's what Jack's doing, he's drinking too. It's like, no, it's a metaphor. The territory, like going to the territories, is a sort of metaphor for wanting to escape from the mundane horrors of reality. Maybe.
Yeah, and I don't even think like the territories itself has to be a metaphor for being drunk, but just the method of getting to this state as consuming alcohol is a really interesting, thematically rich idea, right? Like we've been given many, many hints throughout the story, and I think perhaps told directly by Speedy early in the story, that this juice that he's drinking is not necessary for flipping, right? That he has the power to do it on his own. He just doesn't know how. He did it as a kid, and he doesn't remember, and he doesn't really understand it enough. And this just kind of like oils the wheels a little bit. And I like that idea of we're going to see other methods of entering the territories this week. We're going to see the way Morgan Sloat gets there, and this is a very different kind of way of entering this world of magic and heightened experience and wonder. And so we're seeing these contrasting ways, and I think it's really interesting to contrast Sloat's way, using an alcoholic beverage and then just doing it naturally. We get a little bit later when he's taking the medicine, Jack feels like he's about to flip, which is still using a substance, but it is much more natural. And I think we can kind of see the ways in which the book values one method over the other.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to consider that maybe anytime he takes a substance that gives him a very slightly altered state of consciousness, that's all he really needs is the altered state of consciousness, and maybe he can kind of induce his own altered state of consciousness by just maybe remembering what it felt like to be a kid and to live in kind of a magical dream world in his own mind, and maybe that's the trick.
Yeah, I like that. I liked it a lot. So the cops show up and take poor Snowball away, and Jack heads back to the turnpike, unsure of whether to quit his quest or to go on. He leaves it up to chance and flips a coin, which of course lands on heads for continuing west, which is, a perfect example of what we were just talking about here. This idea of character choice, but also of the hand of God, of fate, of, the tower of a higher power of Gan, basically reaching down and saying, But at the same time, just because, God makes the coin land on heads, and then you see the face of your mother on this coin, even though it's just a normal American coin, Jack still chooses to go on, right? Like nothing's making him stay. Like, he didn't swear an oath to the coin flip that he's like, like he just takes it as a sign and chooses based on that sign.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it could very well have landed the other way, and then he would have said like, okay, I'm not really going to turn back, or vice versa. It could have landed this way, and he could have said, no, it's just too miserable. I can't bear it.
Yeah. I do really love this little vignette we get as Jack is doing this thing, and this incredibly magical thing is kind of shining down on him, because we get this part right here. It says, a family passing in an old station wagon stopped squabbling long enough to look at him curiously. The man driving the wagon, a balding CPA who sometimes awoke in the middle of the night fancying that he could feel shooting pains in his chest and down his left arm, had a sudden and absurd series of thoughts. Adventure, danger, a quest of some noble purpose, dreams of fear and glory. He shook his head as if to clear it, and glanced at the boy in the wagon's rear-view mirror, just as the kid leaned over to look at something. Christ, the balding CPA thought. Get it out of your head, Larry. You sound like a fucking boy's adventure book. So I just love, like, we take, a CPA who's on the verge of dying of a heart attack, like the most mundane and monotonous life and person, and even we show that the magic is so strong that even he catches a glimpse of it and is impacted by it in some way.
Yeah. It is fun. I always like to imagine that these sorts of tertiary characters are touched by what they see, and they go on to sort their lives out.
Yeah, he's gonna like get really into hiking and lose 100 pounds and not have a heart attack.
Yeah, exactly.
That would be nice. Yeah. So from here, Matt, we move on to one of the more uncomfortable sections of the book. Jack dealing with child predators on the road. They all have different names, but they all basically want the same thing. And look, as much as I want to just like whistle past this part of the book, it would be disingenuous for us to just completely ignore it. In this section, King and Straub, I think, have a very dated outlook on gay folks, like basically saying people that are gay and pedophiles are interchangeable. It's the same people is what the text kind of implies here. It's not great, right? This isn't great.
Yeah, when did this book come out?
84, I believe.
Yeah, it feels about right.
Yeah.
It's uncomfortable for sure. I guess the thing is, last week or maybe the week before, whenever it was that we were talking about like, oh, you can't go hitchhiking because you're going to get murdered. I think this is the kind of thing that we were also thinking about.
Yes,
and I actually didn't for some reason didn't think the book was going to include this stuff. Although it is a totally realistic thing that would happen, is just like a kid would get assaulted or threatened while on the road. And
it's certainly possible, especially for a young kid traveling alone like that. Yeah. I have no problem with the book dealing with the concept of pedophilia. Yeah. I think the part that makes me like grab my collar a little bit is just the way Jack like just describes them as like just gay people. It's like, yeah, I see gay people all the time in LA. And then he reads this passage right here, which is just like, what? It says, these were the annoyances a good-looking 12-year-old boy in Los Angeles simply learned to put up with, the way a pretty woman learns to put up with being groped occasionally on the subway. You eventually find a way to cope without letting it spoil your whole day. And I'm just like, the pretty women on the subway part, I can believe people are that horrible that's just a reality for women. But is this really true that like 12-year-old boys in LA are just like having to deal with people propositioning them for sex all the time or trying to grope? Like, that's fucking insane.
I don't know, honestly. It could be that the world is exactly like this. I guess I wasn't a good looking 12-year-old boy. It's entirely possible.
Yeah, I definitely was not.
I'm lucky enough not to know if the world is this way.
I mean, I'm sure it certainly happens, but the book treats this as just like a common occurrence that Jack is like very, very used to dealing with. And he has like a whole strategy for how he deals with LA people, and learns that his strategy for dealing with LA people does not work in this part of the country. It's just wild to me.
I guess I don't I don't know how to. It's funny because I just kind of like did that thing where you're just reading and your brain is just like, yeah, sure, okay, I guess that's the thing. And it's only kind of now that we're talking about it that I'm like, I don't think that's really a thing. Yeah, I'm not like you just said. It's not that it never happens. It's just that like it's not such a normal occurrence that you would just like have have a prepared strategy for it at the age of
Yeah.
12. Like I
Yeah.
had never encountered anything like this when I was 12. I'll just put it that way.
I mean, and it is very possible you and I have just lived very sheltered, assaultless lives as children. But man, I hope this is not a common occurrence.
Well, maybe the 80s were a different time. I mean, like it's possible because like
I don't know
nowadays
if they were that different.
well, I honestly don't know. Like that. Here's the thing: is like just culturally speaking, if somebody's kid says like, "Hey, the guy in the dressing room propositioned me," then like they're gonna like call the cops, right? Like nowadays. Whereas
Mhm.
I feel like back then it was just maybe just a thing where you were just like just brush it off and don't talk about it.
I guess, yeah. I think you have a point there.
See, that's the thing. We were tiny little babies in the 80s. We don't really know what the 80s were like other than the media from the 80s. So
That's true. That's true. Yeah,
anyway.
man. I don't know. I like, and I do understand the reason for including it is exactly like the risks of hitchhiking that you and I were talking about. They're outlining these are some of the risks of doing this, and Jack is having to deal with some of the stuff. It's another step on his road of trials is just dealing with disgusting, gross people. That ugh, it's so gross. But yeah, it's just like there's a few things in here that aged this book that reminded me definitively that this was a book written in the 80s.
Yeah.
So we learn here that Jack is currently dealing with this pedo by hiding in the woods until the guy gets frustrated and drives away, which allows King and Straub to have him once again look around and reflect on how fucking shitty our world is. This is a refrain we're hitting a lot here. Jack spared another look around. Ugly. Wretched. These words came quite naturally to mind as he looked around at the literary desolation here on the rest area's pimply backside. It occurred to Jack that there was a feeling of death here, not just at the rest area or on the interstate roads, but pressed deep into all the country he had traveled. Jack thought that sometimes he could even see it, a desperate shade of hot, dark brown, like the exhaust from the short stack of a fast-moving Jimmy Pete. So what do you think about this, Matt? This is not only just this ugliness of rest stops, which I think something we've all experienced of just, litter strewn mess all over the side of a highway. But like how this is more encompassing than just that this is a death that surrounds our world.
There's a lot of complicated things to say here. I mean, the first thing that came to mind actually was sort of a contradiction to the point here. Cause like I've done my share of cross-country highway driving and I've always found it to be kind of beautiful. I'm not saying that rest stops don't get gross sometimes. Just like anywhere that humans congregate and it's kind of nobody's job to clean it is going to get gross.
Yeah.
But like so okay, so let's set aside the fact that I just don't agree with this depiction of the way the world is, and just take the book at face value. So there seems to be these ideas in this week's reading in particular, especially after we meet Wolf, that like this is sort of a fallen world that we live in. Maybe it used to be better. Maybe it used to be more beautiful and more magical, and now it's fallen. This is a bit reminiscent of just general Dark Tower ideas that there used to be magic in the world, and the magic has left the world. And
it's not specifically anti-industrial and anti progress and commerce, but it kind of is those things, but it's not like specifically like this is not anti-capitalism, the book, right? But it is, even in the Dark Tower, it was more broadly like when we went to this over reliance on technology and computers and these things, in some way a little bit of the magic of the world was lost, and that is according to the book, a bad thing. And according to this book, it seems like it is a bad thing as well. That something was lost in our transition away from a society or a world of mystery and magic. That we used to have these things, and they're gone now.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting how they keep using the word mystery specifically.
Yeah,
and yeah, there's no more mysteries in our world.
Yeah, which, I mean, true in a way. I mean, look, there's still a lot of, I think you pointed this out a couple weeks ago, that there's still a lot of unknown things in our universe that we barely understand. But like, that's incredibly complicated stuff that only like 2% of the population is or less is going to actively be trying to solve. For the most part, the everyday human being that lives on the planet, there's not a lot of mystery left in the world. You know, as you grow, you kind of like, you see the boundaries of what the world is. And this is just the way the world works. There's not magic. But I mean, that even saying that's not something that everyone agrees with. So I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know. It's been interesting. The book has given us a lot of opportunities to kind of poke at this theme, but I don't feel like have enough information to settle in on what exactly the book is saying with it yet.
Yeah, and I think this is actually, I think you're right. And I think what the book is saying is going to end up being very, very key here, because what is Jack doing other than, you know, traveling across the world to get a magical talisman that's going to solve all the problems? And we've already been told, like, we've seen all these other totems and talismans in the world. We're going to see another one in a few minutes that belongs to Morgan Sloat that is, you know, incredibly magical in one world and incredibly mundane in the other. And so what does that mean? And what does it mean to bring magic into a world like ours that doesn't have it anymore? Because it seems fairly destructive. I mean, that is, you know, one thing we've seen is that the book is very clear that bringing our technology to the world of the territories is bad, right? Is a bad thing. It's destructive. It's bad. The book has been pretty clear about that, because the bad guy wants to do that, and the good guy was like, no, we shouldn't do that. The question is, what about the reverse of that? Because we have one instance of a magical item being brought from the territories to our world, and it electrocuted Jerry Bledsoe to death. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps it is actually, in some sense, correct and necessary that the magic be put in one world, and the science and the rationality be put in the other world, and and you know, maybe there's some purpose behind that we'll find out.
I think Wolf is another great example of this, because he's a person that does not belong in our world, and our world makes him miserable, right?
Yep.
So we'll talk about that more when we get to it.
Let's do it.
All right. So as he's walking to the nearest to that rest stop he's at, Jack bumps into our good friend Morgan Sloat. He just turns the corner, and there he is. Jack decides that whoever plays the changes be damned. He has to get out of here, and he takes a sip of his Poiple Jesus and flips back over into the territories, and thus ends our chapter. Such
a shock that we just like. I like couldn't accept that this was actually real. Like,
but wait, he's just there.
Sloat's just there. Yeah. Just at some random rest stop. I mean, so like, it's too much of a coincidence to be a coincidence. It has to be that Sloat has some like magical means of tracking him, or, you know, informers or something. That's because he's too good at following Jack.
Yeah, I mean, the coincidence here is mounting to a level that I think you would be very, very fair in making that assumption. Yeah. All right, so we move into our next chapter, chapter 16, wonderfully titled Wolf. And of course, we get to meet Wolf right here and now. And so we've already kind of talked about him, but just to reiterate, what do you think of our friend Wolf here?
I mean, he's great. You know, it's funny because, you know, if you say it's true that this is a king archetype, I say thank you. I can't think of too many examples. The only other example I can think of is not from a book that I've read, which would be The Green Mile.
That is one. You are correct.
But yeah, I mean, this being my first major exposure to this archetype, I'm just in love with Wolf.
Great. All right. When Jack first sees Wolf, he thinks he's an Elroy thing, and he's not quite wrong there, right? Because we do learn that Wolf is a werewolf, an actual werewolf, not like a weregoat thing. He's just a werewolf. And remember when I mentioned werewolves last week, Matt, and I was fucking setting you up, and you didn't even know it.
No, I didn't know it. I did not know that.
So, I mean, what is the difference, I guess, between the Elroy thing and the wolf thing? Are they different species of were creature? What do you think's going on here?
I think Elroy things are werewolves who have been like kidnapped by Sloat and made evil. I think they're basically the same thing.
Okay.
I just think that they break the rules and then they become, bad.
So the hooves are less goat hooves and more like Satan hooves.
Yeah. I mean, we don't really know exactly how all of this works or what the rules are. So it's entirely possible that, like, if they break the rules, they become damned. It's more than just a metaphorical, spiritual damnation. Like maybe they literally become monstrous if they break the rules.
Sure. No, I like that. Just a little bit of king shadowing we get here, Matt. Jack perhaps would not have lingered to see that, and everything that happened thereafter, the movie theater, the shed, and the hell of the Sunlight home, would not have happened, or would at the very least have happened in some completely different way. But in the extremity of his terror, he froze completely after getting up. So I just wanted to point that out because, of course, you get to see two of the three things mentioned on this list, right? We get to see the movie theater, we get to see the shed, and now you are left wondering what the hell the Sunlight home is.
Yeah. Oh, what the hell's the Sunlight home? And that's not even the end of the foreshadowing this week because later he'll mention something else we'll get to.
Yeah.
But no, it's funny because this is pretty strong and specific foreshadowing, which is telegraphing in this case that we're definitely going to go back to Earth with Wolf.
Yeah, that's true.
Or at least that's how I read it at the time. And so, yeah, when was not at all surprised that he ends up taking Wolf back with him.
I never thought of it that way, but you're absolutely right. I mean, I paid attention to the foreshadowing of the future events, but never just the idea that those events occur must mean that Wolf is coming along for the ride. No, you're totally right.
I don't think it quite says that specifically, but I just couldn't. I just took that inevitable meaning from this.
Yeah, I think you have to. You have to. So Wolf and Jack get to know each other a little bit more, and we get to see more delightful Wolf-isms. Here we have Wolf, shaking hands right here and now. The boy thing in the Oshkosh Bibballs cried, delighted. Right here and now. Good old Wolf, God pound it. Right here and now. Wolf. Just like fucking delightful, right? Like I don't know. This is, again, there's a character in the stand that all of our audience knows I'm thinking of right now that you will meet here in a few months' time that has his own bits of sayings that he repeats over and over again. And this is definitely a kingism to have a character like this who has specific sayings that they like repeating over and over again. And every single time I just find them delightful. And I'm not even sure why, from like a technical, like analysis storytelling perspective, why I enjoy that kind of thing, but I just do it.
Yeah. No, it is an interesting question because it's like, why do we find it delightful and not annoying? Because it seems like it could just as easily be annoying, but I don't think it is at all. Maybe it's like just it's just the execution. I don't know how else to say it.
I think it's a combination of, we generally like catchphrases anyway, because that's why characters on sitcoms have catchphrases. And just Wolf's aw shucks goodness is just a type of archetype that people generally endear themselves to. Like when it's innocence. It's this combination of innocence and kindness, and coming from a person who could be so strong and powerful is just the type of thing that we can't get enough of.
Yeah, I think you're right. I also think there's something wonderful about right here and now as a catchphrase.
Yeah.
It's just so wholesome.
Yeah.
One imagines that this is what dogs are always thinking, because for dogs, there's kind of nothing other than the right here and now.
You're so right. You're so right.
And I mean, Wolf has a lot in common with the dog. Mm-hmm. He's potentially fearsome, but actually just like totally loving and selfless. But he also has an animal side.
So we also see here that Wolf knows Jack's dad, or he knew him. He can smell right away that his dad has passed on, and he apologized for it. And I love this because the link to that this man, this boy Wolf, knew my father, immediately endears Jack to him, and also hits him with the goofy stick, which is just like the absurdity of the situation, the absurdity of the fact that people have his entire life told him, you look like your dad, you act like your dad, you sound like your dad. This is the first time anyone's ever said you smell like your dad. Just makes Jack laugh. And Jack needs a few laughs, right?
Good to see Jack laughing about something.
Yeah.
You can tell that the Wolf's going to be a good influence on him.
So out of nowhere, we suddenly, from this moment, this chapter ends, and instead of moving on to chapter 17, we are suddenly brought face to face with an interlude. Suddenly we're on our second interlude, also titled Sloat in This World, with the 2 in the parenthetical. It's not the end of a part, which is what happened in the first one. So it is, I'm curious of what your reaction to this like sudden shift in perspective, this kind of surprising shift in perspective that we happened here.
Well, I mean, sorry to disappoint, but I didn't really notice it as being unusual because I wasn't really paying attention to the structural placement of it. You know, I mean, I liked it as a chapter.
Well, that's good. Well, not really. I guess we'll just move on then.
Yeah, just sorry, everybody.
The interlude itself is less than 2 pages long and mostly circles around a key that Sloat has. This key goes to a little wind-up toy soldier that he found in a pawn shop years back, but Sloat took one look at it and knew it was more than that. And indeed, we'll see in the following chapters that in the territories, this key turns into a terrible lightning rod / magic wand that just like seems to summon electricity and vaporize things.
Yeah, the most interesting part of all of that to me is that Sloat apparently has this extremely specific sixth sense related to the key. The way it's written, it seems like he's just walking along, suddenly becomes viscerally aware that this key is super important. He has to get the key. So it seems kind of like our villain here has a bit of the shine on his own, doesn't it?
Yeah, certainly. I think that would be fair. We don't quite. And maybe I'm speaking out of turn here, but we don't quite know the time. Like, I assume this was after he had already been in the territories for the first time that he comes across this key. Yeah. It wasn't just this random thing he carried around. And then when this larger world opened in front of him, he came to realize it was more than that. I think he knows about magic, but yeah, the fact that this thing called out to him is very specific.
That was my assumption as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the text then goes on to tell us definitively that the reason for Jerry Bledsoe's death was because Sloat accidentally dropped this key in his office after flipping back from the territories, and he assumes that either Bledsoe either picked it up or touched it or got too close to it or did something with it, and it had a bunch of residual magic from its time over in the territories, and it fried him to death. So this seems to be, as we talked about earlier, kind of the definitive answer to Jack's who plays those changes question, because it was obviously not the act of flipping itself that killed Jerry Bledsoe. It was something much more insidious and purposeful than Jack has considered, and possibly, than Phil has considered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. I mean, there's a lot of mystery surrounding Sloat and his whole relationship with the territories.
Yeah.
All of his interactions with the territories seem violent and destructive. The next chapter, I believe, directly compares it to rape.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a piece with that you just accidentally kill somebody in the course of doing whatever it is that he's doing. Mm-hmm. I suspect that, the earthquakes are also caused by him, that he's just stuff that he is doing in the course of his normal interaction with the territories is having all these just terrible second consequences.
Sure. Yeah. I think that makes sense. And I like it because I think it complicates Phil Sawyer's relationship to the territories as well, because we don't know definitively, but it seems like Phil, knows Bledsoe died, but isn't aware of the key, right? He isn't aware of the key's cause in it, because it is Phil who finds the key in the office, right, and gives it back to Morgan. And so, to Phil, just like to Jack, they were mucking around the territories, they flipped back over, and this guy ends up dead. And it's like, uh-oh, I'm realizing that my actions have consequences, and I'm going to put that all on my shoulders. And like with Jack, we realize that, no, you're probably a little off base here. It's something much more specific and purposeful than all that. And it's fucking Morgan's fault.
Makes sense, yeah.
Yeah. So this little interlude ends with Morgan seemingly knowing that Jack is nearby, preparing to shift over to the territories and finish this. But first, more Wolf.
Yay.
We move on to chapter 17, titled Wolf and the Herd. We see that Wolf is a shepherd, which is, by the way, just fucking hilarious that the wolf is the shepherd.
Yeah.
Of the sheep. It's the wolf.
Yeah. The wolf, the wolf kind actually are the shepherds.
Yeah.
They eat everything except sheep.
And he belongs to the wolf's family, which I love this detail, right? That is, it's not the wolves, it's the wolves. I love that detail. Also, another little hilarious detail of Wolf.
It is. It's a fun kind of almost like intentionally childish touch.
Yeah.
Like the sort of thing that you would expect in like a children's book.
And Jack here compares them to the Native Americans of pre-colonial America, at least in their relationship with their sheep cows, as compared to the relationship of Native Americans with the buffalo of the plains.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the sheep cows thing is especially hilarious because it can't just be some normal animal. They need to be these like super goofy, cutesy things.
I love it.
Yeah.
So finally, Jack breaches the topic of what these fucking werewolves do around their sheep when they turn into fucking werewolves once a month. And we get this little bit here. Oh, we don't go near the herd when we change, Wolf said seriously. God, Jason, no. Good, Jason, no. We'd eat them. Don't you know that? And a wolf who eats of his herd must be put to death. The Book of Good Farming says so. Wolf, we have places to go when the moon is full. So does the herd. They're stupid, but they know they have to go away at the time of the big moon. Wolf, they better know God pound them. So I think this is important because this is like the second named character Jack has come across in the territories, at least companion character. We have Farron, the first one, and then Wolf. And the second one that is directly quoted from the good book, the Book of Good Farming here. So like, I think that's enough to start seeing a pattern, right?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like this book is, number one, something more than just the Bible. Like it seems to have some very specific and actionable advice in it.
Yeah.
It's like it's funny. It's like a cross between the religious text and also like an almanac.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Except it also has advice about what werewolves should do. So it's clearly specific to this world. I only mention that because it's like part of me at first was like, maybe this is, Poor Richard's Almanac that fell through a rift or whatever. And it's like, no, I don't think Poor Richard's Almanac has advice about what werewolves should do.
I mean, when's the last time you read it?
That's a good point. It's a good point.
Yeah, I like this. And I also like this as like, these are people, the good people we've encountered are people that live by some sort of code outlined in this book, whatever it is. And that is very important to them. And I think that is important to the overall structure of the book as well. That there is, it doesn't have to be religious. It doesn't have to be specific to God or any specific kind of God. But this is a commonality in King, right? That there is. We've already talked about this today and every episode. That there is some higher form of power that is bringing structure and purpose to the universe. And the characters that succeed the most are the ones that are sufficiently, I don't want to say reverential to it, but respecting of it.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, I like that.
We also learn that there are wolves that have abandoned their charge and joined up with Morganavorus, and who taught them to eat of the herd, for which they are damned, which of course ties back to what you were talking about with the Elroy thing, that perhaps that is a literal damnation and not just a metaphorical one.
Yeah.
So we also learn a bit more about Wolf's relationship with Phil Sawyer, Matt, and I wanted to talk about this for a bit because we do see that it was Phil that brought Wolf some of the bib overalls that Wolf loved so much. He loved them so much he wore them out, and then his mother knitted him a version of these that he wears constantly every day. And the original ones he got from Phil, he still sleeps with every night. What do you think about this? Because again, this is the same guy who thought bringing things to these people was bad, and he brings them a clothing and a material type that they don't have.
That's a very interesting point. I mean, obviously it affected this person quite a bit.
Yeah.
And it does seem like that Jack would run into this one particular wolf dude who Phil gave the thing to. I mean, I don't know if we can necessarily say that it was good for Wolf, because maybe Wolf doesn't come out of this so good. I mean, in the end, we don't know how the story ends. So I don't know. I guess it seems, at the very least, you could say we're being ambiguous about what exactly it means to interfere in the other world.
Yeah. I do think there is an order of magnitude difference between bringing over some overalls and bringing the concept of electricity. Certainly. But I do think it's worth pointing out, because the book takes the time to point it out.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder, presumably the werewolf folk have clothes, right? They're not. It's not like it's not like Wolf is the only one who wears clothes, because I would assume so, if his mom can sew, which is, by the way, just a very delightful image of presumably giant werewolf woman sewing her little son with some overalls. It's just delightful.
Just eyeing the design based on the things that that he had. It's wonderful. It's all wonderful. And unfortunately, the wonder of the scene is interrupted, Matt. Sloat's flip begins, and it isn't like Jack's at all. We see that there's this violent ripping sound, as if someone is grabbing the border between the two worlds and tearing it apart. Like you mentioned a few minutes ago, it is compared directly to rape. And it's awful. And the herd starts to stampede, and Wolf loses his mind, and everything starts to escalate. And I love this part here where Jack is looking at this thing and wondering, is this what happens when I flip? And then realizes that, of course, no, it isn't. This is something totally different. But he says here, "Oh, Jason, is that what I do when I come through?" And I love the detail there, because is that just, "Oh, Jesus," auto-translated into Territorian? And I don't think so, because none of the other phrases and things he said have been so before. I think he said, "Oh, Jason."
Yeah, I think he's going native in his own mind, and he said, "Oh, Jason" to himself, because he's starting to internalize it.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that's an important fact there, is that was not dialogue. That was just in his brain. He's internalizing the territories a lot. Mm-hmm. I really, really love in this scene of absolute chaos, Matt, that we see that Wolf seems to only care about his cattle, and that Jack, despite his worst fear being realized, Morgan Sloat finding him at last, doesn't run and abandon the guy. He goes and tries to help Wolf. It's almost as if he's like good people or something.
Almost. Yeah, I mean, I have to remark how worried I was about Wolf. The authors got me to care about this character very quickly, and I was very invested in Wolf being okay, and I could have totally seen a path where, because we've been piling on Jack a lot lately, and I was like, what would really just absolutely nail this poor kid who we're obviously trying to make miserable, is if he got this Wolf guy killed just for having the misfortune of being near him when Sloat was chasing him. Mm-hmm. Which I guess could still happen, but in this moment, I was like, oh no, I really believe that Wolf might die here, actually, and I was really upset about it. And I think just overall, since Wolf came into the story, my level of emotional investment tripled, basically.
Sure.
Not just because I love Wolf, but also the at this point, we've already planted some of the seeds of the idea that these werewolf creatures are not entirely cuddly, fuzzy, unambiguously positive things. Mm-hmm. And so as we move forward in the story, we really play with this tension that is at the heart of having a best friend who is a werewolf, who is intrinsically a two-sided creature.
Yeah.
We'll get more into that as we go, though.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I kind of skipped over that at the beginning, but yeah, this idea that he is both things, and there's some inherent tension there. But yeah, I think you're totally right, and I think that like here's maybe the answer to why we were comparing him with Jake so much this week. Here maybe the definitive answer. Characters need traveling companions. Like for stories like this to work, it can't just be the protagonist the whole time. Like it just can't. They need companions. They need a quartet, and we're seeing Jack for the first time kind of get his version of that. And so that reminds you of his
boy.
Yeah. In some ways. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, it's a sort of canine, and he has a catchphrase.
Woof. Oi.
Yeah.
It's the same. It's the same. Yeah.
It's the same.
Yeah. So we do get to see something interesting here in this moment, though, Matt, because as Morgan Sloat enters into the territories, we see that he literally becomes Morgan of Orris. His flushed, hanged jowls thinned. The color faded out of them. His hair renewed itself, growing forward, first tinting the rondure of his skull as if something invisible were coloring Uncle Morgan's head, then covering it. The hair of Sloat's twinner was long, black, flapping, somehow dead-looking. It had been tied at the nape of his neck, Jack saw, but most of it had come loose. The parka wavered, disappeared for a moment, then came back as a cloak and hood. So this is new. I mean, we know that people look different from their twinners. Like we know this, though not as unusually different as the Morgans do. Like we saw that Jack's mother and the Queen, are recognizably similar, but a little bit different in the face structure. These are two entirely different people. And we definitely didn't know that people changed into their twinner when they swapped, which raises a lot of questions.
Just all sorts of questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I love the beat of his description of how like Morgan of Orris is actually handsome compared to Sloat, but then he smiles and we see that his teeth are hideous. Yeah. And that's just such a great touch there. But yeah, related to all the questions that it raises, I don't know what to think, actually. I'm not really quite ready to just take this at face value and just say like, oh, when you cross over, you turn into your twinner. Because the book earlier did let us know that Morgan, when he trashed that family's restaurant, I believed that he wasn't quite Sloat. And again, that's, very vague, and that could mean all sorts of things. But the implication I took is like, I don't know, maybe he can choose to manifest as one or the other of his twinner forms, depending on what he, wants to get up to. Maybe I'm reading too much into that. I don't know. But anyway, the other question that it raises, which I think maybe is the one that you were hinting toward, is like metaphysically, if Jack's twinner is dead, then is Jack becoming, Jason? Is he becoming the dead twinner when he crosses over? Has he ever even seen his face when he's in the territories? Does he look different when he's in the territories?
Yeah. That's exactly a great question that we don't know the answer to. I mean, and the other thing, just like, is there not a Morgan of Orris just like wandering around the territories when Morgan Sloat is in our world? And like, what happens to that guy? Like, yeah, like when you flip, do you just enter the body? Because obviously you don't just enter the body of your twinner that's over here, because he transformed. Right. So like, is this why Jack is special? Is because Jack doesn't have to follow those rules, but then we see that Morgan doesn't necessarily have to either. So yeah, there's a lot of practical questions that are asked from this moment.
Well, that's, I mean, maybe exactly, like, is Morgan special in his own way? Because like you say, this almost implies that that Morgan of Orris and Morgan Sloat are not two people. Because if they were two people, then what?
Where did he go? Where's Morgan of Orris when he does this?
And does he come back when Sloat goes back to his world? I mean, I don't know. This is the kind of theory crafty stuff I usually avoid, but I'm like, surely there are some answers to these questions. Otherwise, it would just be really confusing. We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm having fun knowing that there's no possible way you can have an answer to them. That's the source of my joy. But yeah, no, it's just a lot of stuff raised by this one pretty badass moment, actually.
It is a pretty badass moment.
The Morgans, which we're going to call them now until we know what to call, seem really keen on getting Jack to look at them. They this cry over and over again, look at me, look at me. And we see that Jack actually feels the urge to do so, as if their words were compelling in some way. Some more magic we don't know about, Matt? Is Morgan of Orus like a magician?
Yeah, I feel comfortable saying that he is. I feel like we knew that he was, actually, but maybe I misinterpreted. But anyway, yeah, I think he's a magician. I think he probably has some magics where, you know, he wants you to look at him so he can hypnotize you or whatever. And it's a good thing they don't. Good thing they don't look at him.
It's just like good old Randall Flagg in the Dark Tower movie, right?
Yep. Just
Stop breathing.
Exactly like that. Stop breathing.
What a power.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one more thing. Morgan of Orus is calling out for Jack here, but he's not calling him Jack. As you already alluded to, he's calling him Jason. And in this moment, Jack realizes that Jason is the name of his twinner, or would have been the name of his twinner before he died. But Jason is also the name of that everyone's been using in place of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So thoughts?
He's
Matt?
Jesus. He's Jesus.
So that's just he's okay.
He's Jesus. He's the Messiah. I mean, like if there's a prophecy, then I'm just going to say that he's the Messiah. He's the Messiah reborn. He's the savior of the territories.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. you just threw it out there. You just 7 months of work, and you just said it.
Just said it out. Yeah.
So Wolf is drowning in the river, being knocked around by his flock as Morgan is shooting lightning bolts at them. Jack struggles his way to Wolf, grabs the last bit of his magic potion, and drinks it, flipping back to our world and taking Wolf with him. This was such a delightfully intense scene, and I just want to know what you thought about the scene as a whole.
I mean, it's a great scene. Like you said, intense. I'm getting more and more invested in the story, and just kind of on the edge of my seat proverbially while I'm worried about, is he gonna, is Wolf gonna get out of this? Is Sloat gonna catch him? Still, like, feel like this kind of supports my theory that Jack doesn't really need the juice.
Yeah.
Like, one reason being that he's able to pull Wolf with him, and it's like Wolf didn't have any juice. So
yeah. Also, like, he took it's like one sip. Like, it was like there's nothing left in the jar.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just a suggestion. Yeah.
But now we begin chapter 18. Wolf goes to the movies.
That's a great chapter title. That's one of those chapter titles where you're like, oh boy.
So the chapter starts with Wolf freaking the fuck out by the noises of our world, a trend that will continue throughout the next couple of chapters. The noises, the smells. Wolf hates our world. And like we said, maybe that's just because it's not his world. This is not where he belongs. And so, of course, he doesn't like it.
Yeah. Yet again, I think it's kind of remarkable that we don't at all get annoyed by Wolf's antics here. Like just like we don't get annoyed by his catchphrases. And I think it's just because he's so damn lovable, and we know his heart is in the right place, and he's just basically a big dog who loves Jack. And you can't really be that mad at a dog, even if they're being kind of a pain, which Wolf is being here. Yeah,
you're right. I mean, his entire purpose in this chapter is to get in Jack's way and prevent Jack from doing the things that he wants, which would come off as annoying. We're going to talk about this a little bit more at the beginning of the next chapter. But I totally agree with that. The fact that we never get to the annoying spot is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, right.
So the opening of the chapter introduces a couple ticking problems for us to deal with right now. The first is that Jack is getting sick. He has a fever, and it's getting worse. And that's not good when you're traveling and on the road and sleeping in barns and sheds and stuff. And then the second one is there a full moon coming soon? I think there is.
There's always a full moon coming at some point.
I do find this little detail remarkable, though, that Wolf in our world is given a pair of John Lennon looking glasses on his head, and when Jack asks him about it, if he had trouble seeing, in the territories. He's like, yeah, I mean, I didn't think so, but now that I'm looking around here, yeah, which is just like a delightful little bit of magic that's going on in the flip. But I don't really understand how it works because like, so you couldn't see, and then you flipped, and it was like, oh, well, in this new world, there's technology that could help with that. So we'll just give that to you automatically.
I admit that I think this is probably just something that one of the authors thought would be funny.
Yes, but if we don't overanalyze it, someone will email us about it.
You're right. I mean, and I can't argue with you because there always is like a second and third level of meaning if you think about it hard enough. But honestly, I really just kind of think that the idea of like a big werewolf dude in John Lennon glasses is really funny.
It is. And it's delightfully kind of whatever magical power is changing our character's clothes here to like, right. I mean, this exists. Well, I want to help you out.
That's kind of an interesting feature of the magic is that it's like weirdly considerate actually.
Yeah.
Like it changes people's clothes in a way that's like roughly proportionate and it's like, who's making these calls? Who's saying like, oh, Sloat, okay, he had a parka. What's like a parka? Like a cloak. Like, yeah, but he's evil though. So he's evil, so it'll be like a black cloak. That's it. You know, and it gives you a sense that there's a kind of intelligence behind the magic, which I don't know if there actually is, but that's just kind of a vibe.
Even if it's not a sentient intelligence, there is some choices being made automatically, even if so. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, it is.
So we do a little bit of mucking with the structure here. Again, we moved 2 days later where the two haven't made much progress. And then we actually end this section briefly with a cut to Wolf's perspective, which I again, you know, talking about why this guy isn't annoying, it's stuff like this. Wolf sat down beside Jack, remaining silent, looking at Jack anxiously. He knew how hard he was making it for Jack. He knew that Jack was in a fever to move faster, partly to outdistance Morgan, but mostly for some other reason. He knew that Jack moaned about his mother in his sleep, and sometimes cried. But the only time he had cried when awake was after Wolf went a little crazy on the Arcanum turnpike ramp. That was when he realized what Jack meant by hitching. When Wolf told Jack he didn't think he could hitch rides, at least not for a while, and maybe not ever, Jack had sat down on the top strand of the guide rail cable and had wept into his hand. So I just love this because I think seeing in Wolf's perspective, to your point, is very important here. That he understands all these things. He understands that he's being a burden. He understands that he's making things more difficult, but he can't fix them. Like he doesn't have the capacity to fix all those issues.
Right. And we empathize with him. And so when he, you know, describes the country of bad smells, like you realize like, oh, this like being here just sucks really bad for him. Like as inconvenient as this is for Jack, we have to see it from Wolf's perspective and realize like, hey, Wolf's in a much worse situation than Jack actually. Like Wolf just got basically kidnapped. His herd is either dead or scattered. He cares a lot about his herd. Like that's just the thing that happened to him. And now he's depending on Jack for everything. So like it's I think it's pretty easy to empathize with Wolf here actually.
Yeah, and despite the fact that his life was saved, he didn't ask to come here. Like he didn't ask to be brought into this world.
Exactly.
And I do like this cutback to where we see how they got into this particular bad situation. And of course, it's that they almost got a ride. They had a ride that was willing to pick them up, but Wolf couldn't handle the smells inside the cabin, even though Jack couldn't smell anything. He gets so angry here that he slaps Wolf around a little bit and does, we see in this moment, think seriously about leaving him in this moment, that everything would be easier if he just left. There's something really, really powerful about this scene.
Yeah, this feels like kind of a crux of the story is this idea of like who is Jack going to be? Is he going to be the kind of person who sacrifices his loyal dog companion for the mission or not? And you know, I thought it was a really powerful scene overall. Like the part where Jack is hitting Wolf is just written in this really affecting way because it's not like Jack is like beating him. Like he's not trying to like beat Wolf into submission. He's not even particularly trying to hurt him. It's more like he doesn't even have an aim with it. He's just like so stressed and upset that he's just like being more forceful than he needs to be. And you kind of know that he regrets doing it, but it's sort of a very, very good convincing way of expressing that somebody is just kind of at their wit's end. And they're just so frustrated they just don't know what to do.
Yeah, well, and I like the detail that the first time he hits him, like it hurts him, like that punching Wolf in the shoulder is like hitting a rock, and then he does it like 6 more times, and so it's like he's almost kind of just punishing himself a little bit too.
Yeah.
Like he's working out his anger, knowing that he couldn't physically hurt Wolf, although he is clearly mentally hurting Wolf because he's howling the entire time, but he's just exhausted and frustrated and doesn't know what to do anymore.
Right. So
Jack and Wolf walk into town with Jack riding horseback on him, which is just wonderful. And Jack, exhausted and feverish, decides what they're going to do next. They're going to go to the movies. Literally everything we've learned about Wolf up until this point points out very clearly how this is a bad plan. Let's just review, right? Wolf doesn't like being inside. Doesn't like weird smells. Doesn't like loud noises. That's a movie theater.
And also, Jack never explains to him what a movie is.
Yeah.
He's just like, we're going to go in the dark room and then a portal to it. Like, it doesn't tell him anything at all.
Yeah.
It's just terrible.
And they go to watch the animated Lord of the Rings movie, right? Which is kind of creepy at times. So I don't remember exactly how that opens, but it's not like, peaceful. Oh, it's okay, Wolf. It's going to be fine. No, it's fucking intense. It's loud.
I've never seen the animated one actually, which is
wow. That's
I know.
You should be ashamed. Everyone shame Matt.
Yeah,
everyone.
I know.
Everyone do it.
Me. I haven't seen the Lord of the Rings cartoon. Me. Anyway. I guess I have to now though. So
you do. It's fine. It's not great. It's fine.
Does it have Elijah Wood in it?
No, it does not.
Oh, okay.
I don't think he was alive when the thing was made.
That's weird.
So despite the fact that this is a terrible, terrible plan, it's a rather delightful scene, Matt. I love the idea of Wolf smelling the popcorn and loving it, but not liking the fake butter that you pour on top of the popcorn. Since I've read this book, I always call that butter juice pee, just like he calls it. I hate that stuff. Right. It's disgusting. And I said, did you get I'll see someone that oh, so you got some pee on your popcorn.
Yeah, I just love his description where he's like, it's clearly rancid and he's trying to be tactful, but because he's Wolf, his attempt to be tactful is like, please do not put any of the pee on mine. It's so funny.
It's so wonderful.
Yeah.
And then we get to the theater itself. And the first line of this section is, Wolf knew it wasn't going to work as soon as they went through the door. But poor Wolf, Matt, he tries so hard. I love the text here. Jack would never know of Wolf's heroism in the next few minutes. Wolf did not really know of it himself. He only knew that he had to try to stick this nightmare out for Jack's sake. It must be all right, he thought. Look, Wolf, Jack's going right to sleep right here and now. And you know Jack wouldn't take you to a hurt place, so just stick it out. Just wait. Wolf, it'll be all right.
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of stuff that makes us love him because, I imagine, taking my, the old family dog that I used to have, to some situation that was just way outside of his comfort zone. Mm-hmm. And it's like, yeah, you can't be mad at a dog for freaking out in that situation. And that's, I'm not trying to insult our character Wolf here by comparing him to a dog. I feel pretty confident that we're meant to compare him to a dog, and feel bad for him here. And if anything, we're kind of annoyed with Jack at this particular kind of bend of the story. We're kind of annoyed with Jack for getting poor Wolf into the situation. Actually,
yeah, it's just so obviously a bad idea. Yeah. And he's tired. He wants a place warm where he can sleep. He's got a fever. Like, I understand Jack's decision here, but it was a bad
It
one.
was a bad call. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, Wolf, as hard as he tries, he can't stick it out. The movie turns on, and that is it for poor Wolf. He loses his mind, and they get kicked out of the theater, and Jack gets no rest.
Uh-huh.
And as they head back to the highway, we see here, it was mid-morning of October 28th, when Jack realized that the hair was back on Wolf's palms. Shit.
And then we begin my favorite part of the story.
Chapter 19, the horror chapter of the novel, entitled Jack in the Box.
All right.
So I think I love this, Matt, because this chapter begins with Wolf going out on his own and sniffing the ground. And I think this is so clever because we leave chapter 18 with this ominous note that it's basically 3 days till the full moon. And then the first thing that happens in chapter 19 is Wolf starts behaving oddly. And so we're establishing this tension early, this tension regarding what is he actually doing here? Is the moon starting to take him? Is he becoming more animalistic? Are we in trouble? We're establishing that right away at the beginning of this chapter.
Yeah. But like I said, my favorite part of the book so far is this gradual building of tension toward the idea of, how are we going to deal with Wolf turning into a monster?
Yeah.
And I love that it's a slow burn. I admit I haven't consumed that much werewolf media in my life, but I feel like the normal way of doing it is to make the transformation like shockingly sudden. Like that's kind of part of the fun of the werewolf mythos is like, oh, they're a man, and then they see the wolf, and then suddenly, rip, tear, clothes are coming off, and it's a monster. But this was like this slow transformation where his personality changes and his body changes over the course of like a couple days.
Yeah.
I just really love it. We'll go into why as we go.
Sure. So it turns out, though, what Wolf is doing here is sniffing out some medicine for Jack, whose fever is getting worse and worse, and who Wolf now smells the same death that he smelled on the guy in the cab of the car on Jack. So immediately we know this is very, very serious. And I was thinking about this for a while, Matt, and I think the Wolf helps out Jack, gives him medicine plot movement of this chapter is a really necessary one to the ongoing success of the story. Everyone loves Wolf, right? You love Wolf, I love Wolf, we all love Wolf. But so far in the book, Wolf has basically been, and we talked about this already, but I'm going to put a name to it. He's basically been Willie from Temple of Doom. And I'm saying this because I just watched Temple of Doom, which is a terrible movie. It's awful. But Willie's purpose in that movie is to get in Indiana Jones' way and prevent him from doing the things he wants to do in the most annoying way possible. That making the, like, not the antagonist, sidekick to the protagonist, but making the protagonist's life more difficult, right? And we've already talked about the reasons why Wolf isn't necessarily that, but I think both Straub and King recognize that while we love Wolf and while we see Wolf, like you said, as the puppy dog and we understand the situation he's in, I think they recognize that this can't continue into perpetuity, right? We need some sort of thing for Wolf to do that aids our hero, or he's just a burden the entire time. And eventually our character and our reader will grow resentful of this burden. And I think further beyond that, we've been told that saving Wolf's life and refusing to leave him even when he wanted to was the, capital R, capital T right thing for Jack to do. And I like that they understand we need some like narrative reward for that, like some reason for why that was the right decision beyond just, general morality. And I think this is it, right? Like, Wolf is here, and now Wolf can help you, and Wolf will save your life. So Wolf shifts to the caretaker role and saves Jack's life in this chapter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's it's the sort of reward, I guess you could say, for Jack making that right choice. Yeah. He does. I agree with everything you just said. It is narratively important that he do that and that he take on that role. Although it's interesting because he moves on from saving Jack's life into like the most interesting narrative role that I don't even have a name for it, which is like best friend suddenly becomes scary monster.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a like fresh concept, and I just, oh God, I'm just in love with this.
Yeah, I mean, this is the fascinating thing about werewolves, and I think how they are different from other transformative creatures. Like one of the things that, yeah, I'm going to talk about Buffy again. I can't fucking help myself.
Okay.
But the thing about vampires in that story is like they represent this idea of one of the things you'll see when we watch that show and do a podcast about it. I'm just going to say that as if it's a fact that is absolutely happening, and then eventually it will come true, right?
Okay. Yep.
The idea that like the person you're very close with suddenly transforms into a monster, right? That inexplicably this person transforms into a monster.
Yeah.
But the thing with vampires is that's like a permanent transformation. You know, you're a human and then you're a vampire. The thing about werewolves is it's not. It's a temporary transformation. And so like the you're absolutely right that wolf transitions from caretaker to threat, but at the end of this chapter, he transitions back into caretaker because he is the one, you know, giving Jack the water and basically nursing him to health after his 3-day confinement. And then Jack curls up and goes, then Wolf curls up and goes to sleep, and the caretaker role has shifted again to kind of back to Jack a little bit. And I think that's one thing that werewolves allow in this kind of story is that it's this ever shifting responsibility and relationship with our characters, because Wolf will transform again. Another month is going to go by, right? And the same thing will happen again, and you're going to have to deal with that again and again and again as long as he's in the story. This will never stop being a threat, but he will also never stop being the other side of this, which is for 27, 28 other days in the month, he's, you know, a kind, warm-hearted, resourceful, and wonderful companion for our hero.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it's funny, as you were talking, you reminded me of one of my favorite, maybe my favorite moment of werewolf stuff put to film, and also my favorite moment out of all the Harry Potter movies, which is when they're leaving the house and they have Lupin with them, and, you know, suddenly the clouds part and we see the moon. And then the camera does this, you know, extremely cool thing where it like zooms out on the moon, and then it like zooms out of Lupin's eye as he starts to transform. It's like it's a very cool moment. And I actually remember thinking it was a really awesome moment in the book too. And I think it's for a similar reason here, which is that you have this guy who was in a caretaker role. He was a friend, he was an ally. And very suddenly, a teacher, and very suddenly he's switched to being a monster, an antagonist, a threat. And I don't know, there's a brilliant kind of storytelling alchemy there where I don't know, maybe, I don't know if it's just me. I don't think it is just me. I think that's just a really cool kind of narrative movement.
No, it is. I think that's one of the most interesting and unique things about werewolf type stories, and that change can happen, and it's always a threat. There's always that tension there.
Yeah. It's very fun. Very fun there. It's very fun here. Yep.
So Wolf continues to give us a bit more information about our world. He tells us that the medicines here still work, but they are much weaker than the medicines in the territories. This makes sense, you know, given what we understand about the territories. But we learn here the good smells are like the medicine plants, weak. I think they were stronger once, which goes back to what we were talking about a little earlier.
Yeah. I think not much to add there. I think maybe the world used to be more magical. It also reminds me of a snippet of conversation. Maybe it was from Jack's dad, where they mentioned that there were perhaps other worlds than these. I don't remember the details of the conversation, but I definitely remember that conversation where either Jack's dad or Sloat like hints at this idea that there's more to it than just the territories and Earth, which, if we take it at face value, does kind of hint that maybe the territories aren't quite Midworld.
Okay. So you're absolutely confident, convinced supposition that territories and Midworld is the same thing isn't quite as strong.
It's not quite as strong. I mean, it opens up it opens us up to the so here's the thing, like it opens us up to the idea that there are many other magical worlds, because in the Dark Tower it kind of seems like there's Midworld, which is kind of unitary, and then there's like billions of Earths, you know, and but there's not like Narnia, right? There's not random magical realms. And this would be, you know, again, assuming that we're kind of putting this in the same framework as the Dark Tower, this would be kind of a whole different concept, is that this world might be another world in addition to Midworld and all of the Earths and everything. Again, I don't know how seriously to take these things, but yeah, I will admit this makes me ratchet down my confidence that the territory is just Midworld by 20%.
Oh, okay. We're throwing numbers on it. All right.
Yes, a full 20%.
Wow. Okay. We'll revisit that in the weeks to come.
Okay.
So Jack takes the medicine and it almost instantly makes him feel better, but he also feels for a moment that it could make him flip back to the territories. We've already kind of talked about this, but more hints that the book is laying down that even though Speedy's juice is gone, he don't need it.
Yeah, there's other ways back. Yeah.
Yep. They resume traveling again, but Wolf continues to grow more hair and to stare at the moon, and his once affable nature starts to take on a little bit more of a sinister tone.
God, I love this. I love this so much.
It's so wonderfully done because he's so charming and wonderful, and then like the lovable, completely innocent smile that he gives suddenly grows menacing, and he just seems to like zone out.
Yeah.
And it's just it's wonderful.
I think my favorite parts is when he'll just be like looking at Jack, and Jack will be like, what's up, buddy? And I'll be like, oh, nothing, you know. Just like
just eating you in my brain.
Oh God. Yeah, and I love that's again, to reiterate, like I love that he's not becoming just feral. Like he's not just turning into a wolf. It's like his personality is changing. He's becoming like colder and more calculating and more kind of ruthless. And like we see that he still cares about Jack, but also he's getting real hungry.
Yeah.
And don't know if we can trust him necessarily.
And suddenly we are here on the day of the full moon itself, and Jack is heading into town to buy a padlock in a desperate attempt to lock Wolf up before he turns. Really waited to the last minute on this one, Jack. He returns back to the shed they've been staying at, and Wolf has disappeared. And I love this moment of indecision in Jack, right? He's relieved that Wolf is gone and is like wants to assume, oh, he recognized that he was a threat to me and went off on his own and everything's gonna be fine. But he's also terrified. And then Wolf shows up there on the edge of the forest, just there.
Just standing there staring at him.
Just looking at him.
Oh my God.
He like it almost goes Little Red Riding Hood a bit. It was like, what are you doing out there? Oh, I just could see you better. Wanted to see you get back.
Yeah.
And we haven't talked about this, but one thing that Jack has been saying over and over again throughout the chapter is, am I the herd now? And he's been saying this in his head, right? He's been saying this to himself. So like he's been reiterating that, like, you know, wolves have to protect the herd, and he's saying, am I the herd now? And then as if answering him, Wolf in this moment looks at him and says, you're the herd now, Jackie.
Oh God, I love it so much. My absolute favorite beat was when he finally says it, and it's like chilling. Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. And you're like, it's funny because like in Wolf's head, that's probably meant to be reassuring, right? He's told him, we do not eat the herd. If we eat the herd, we are damned. But in this moment, to Jack and to us, the readers, you're the food now, Jack.
Well, I think one neat thing that it does is like Jack has been in the position of power up until recently. Like he knows this world. Wolf is afraid and terrified and upset. And even though he's like bigger and stronger than Jack, you never get the sense that Jack is not the one who's in charge here. Yeah. And then this is the you know, especially as we get to this moment where Jack's like, all right, I have the lock.
Yeah.
And Wolf's like, all right, go in the shed.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're like,
Yeah.
okay, I see who's really in charge in a sense.
Yeah, you're right. It's such a wonderful, wonderful flip on the whole thing. And I think this is this is kind of them turning standard werewolf fiction upside down, right? Because in any other standard werewolf fiction, it's during the course of the full moon, the wolf gets locked up. We have to lock up the werewolf when he turns. So for the next 3 days, we'll lock him up. And then the book's like, no. The wolf needs to be free.
Yeah.
You can't stop the wolf. The only way to protect the herd is by locking up the herd. And it's such a wonderful twist on the whole idea.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right that it shifts the power dynamic so wonderfully.
Yeah, the wolf needs to eat. It would be cruel to keep the wolf locked up.
Yeah. The wolf has to. I love the moment where Jack says like, oh, but Wolf is going to be imprisoned still. He's going to be imprisoned inside the werewolf. And then he quickly realizes, oh, no, wait. That's not how this is going to work at all. He's going to be totally free and enjoying the hell out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one fun thing, is to realize like the wolf that we love and kind of the monster who we meet here, they're not really different creatures.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like there is a, like, because they could have written it that way where it's like, and then wolf was gone. It's like, no, it's a continuum. There's a continuum between wolf and monster wolf.
Yeah, definitely. Jack makes Wolf promise not to kill any humans, and he does promise this, and we see he lives up to it. And then we do this scene where Wolf and Jack just kind of hold hands for hours leading up to the moon showing up. Like in the last moments of them together, Wolf just grabs Jack's hand and just holds it. What did you think about this moment?
That's just beautiful. I think it's crucial to our sense of the humanity and the love shared between these characters. Yeah,
I like that. I think it's also, like Wolf is a little scared that he's going to eat Jack. I think he probably would never admit that to himself, but I think he's a little worried that he's not going to listen to Jack or that he'll lose control and eat Jack. And I think it's part of him, reestablishing their bond as well.
Yeah.
That like in my final moments, as this version of myself, I am going to be in direct contact with you, touching you, establishing that we are, that you are my herd, that we are together.
Yeah, exactly. Reminding himself, like the memento thing. Keep it in mind as he slips away. Yeah.
So Wolf's eyes change from his yellow to orange and lastly to red as he locks Jack in the shed and then passes him the key. And then we get another king shadowing here, Matt. He bent down and brushed his fingers along the boards until he touched the key. For a moment, he clamped it so hard into his palm that he almost drove it through his skin. The bruise, shaped like the state of Florida, would endure nearly 5 days. When the excitement of being arrested, he would fail to notice that it had left him.
God damn it, King.
So now you know that Jack's going to be arrested.
Going to get arrested in 5 days.
Yeah, in exactly 5 days.
Yeah, 2 days after he gets out of jail, basically. Or out of the shed, I mean.
Yeah. I'm so broken that the bruise shaped like Florida, I immediately Wes Andersoned it and assumed that it actually looked like...
Exact outline of Florida.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So we now cut over to Wolf as we watch him live his 3 days transformed. Wolf runs free. His nose attains, quote unquote, the condition of genius, which is just a phrase I love. And he eats and eats and eats and eats. He eats a lot, Matt. At one point, it says he slaughtered an entire pen of pigs on a pig farm, which is a lot of pigs.
It's a lot
of pigs.
He eats some dogs too, apparently.
He eats dogs and cats and squirrels.
Which is interesting. Yeah, I guess. I mean, is there an implication that he doesn't eat unless except on the monthly, feeding binge?
I don't know. I don't think he said definitively.
I mean, maybe it's just that he doesn't eat meat outside of the feeding binge, and clearly he needs a lot of protein to power that frame of his.
Definitely. Gosh, he gorges himself for sure. And I want to get your thought on this because we see this moment as well. The instant he set a paw down in those places, his hackles rose and an electric tingling traversed the entire distance of his spine. These were sacred places, and in a sacred place, a wolf could not kill. That was all. Like all hallowed sites, they had been set apart a long time ago, so long ago that the word ancient could have been used to describe them. Ancient is probably as close as we can come to representing the vast well of time Wolf sensed about him in the farmer's backyard and the little clearing, a dense envelope of years packed together in a small, highly charged location. So what's your thought on these places where no killing is allowed?
It feels like another reference to the idea that our world used to have magic in it, and maybe these are specific places of magic. For some reason, it reminds me of the very idea of a talisman being like, I guess I think of a talisman as like a way of protecting something. And so maybe that's why the word talisman pops into mind when I'm thinking about like these hallowed places.
I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah, and I think that just because the magic has receded in this world doesn't mean it's gone. And I like that, if you look at the King multiverse, a lot of the moment, the otherworldly places in his stories could take place on these ancient hallowed sites where magic is still there for some reason.
I love that.
Or good or bad,
Yeah.
Would Wolf be able to hunt around the Overlook Hotel? Probably not.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, interesting.
We then cut over to Jack's experience, which is much less freeing. He spends 3 days locked up with no water, and the only food is the raw meat that Wolf slips under the door for him each morning. He's stuck with his own mind. He walks the perimeter of his shed hundreds and thousands of times, walking miles in this tiny little shed. And his mind keeps going back to his mom and to Morgan Sloat and to Jerry Bledsoe and to the Elroy thing and just replaying all the worst possible scenarios. This is horrifying, Matt. I can't imagine living through 3 days of that.
Yeah, this has got to be one of the stations of the hero's journey, is the part where you get locked in a shed and you are forced to ruminate on all of the horrible stuff that's happened to you.
Yeah, that is actually a chapter in The Hero with 1,000 Faces.
Yeah.
When you get locked in a shed and you have to ruminate on the horrible things that happen to you.
Yeah.
It's chapter 7.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Figured. But no, I mean, like it's we end basically right after he gets out of the shed, so we don't really see what negative effects this horrible confinement had on him.
Yeah, or positive effects. Maybe it allowed him to work through some shit.
Maybe
in a weird way.
Maybe so. I'll just say here, like, he spent time basically imprisoned at the bar. He spent time imprisoned at the shed, and we learned through foreshadowing that he's going to be arrested shortly. So it's just interesting how much of this journey is like hopping between locations where he is being detained against his will. That seems like a thematic thing.
Yeah,
to point out.
No, I like that. So 3 days later, Wolf returns, having kept his promise. He feeds Jack some much-needed water, and then he curls up and falls asleep, and our chapter and section of the book ends. So Matt, I know you know that Jack is about to get arrested, but where does the book go from here? What do you think? The road of trials has been traveled, I guess. Where do we go from here?
I don't remember what the next part of the hero's journey is, and I kind of don't want to look it up because I don't want to cheat. Well,
do you want me to tell you what part 3 of the book is called? Maybe that'll help.
Yeah, tell me that.
Part 3 is called A Collision of Worlds.
Well, I mean, I strongly suspect that he's going to end up going back to, the territories. Like, just because he ran out of the juice, he's not, done with the territories. That seems kind of obvious to me. Collision of Worlds. Maybe we start to see more and more kind of elements going back and forth between the worlds. Sure. You mentioned the idea that Wolf is now part of his quartet. Maybe we get some more quartet members. Okay. Some more people come along to join the journey. Maybe they pick up a cellmate from the prison. Something along those lines, where it's like, that just seems like kind of a Stephen King story beat to me. We
are told that he is on his way to visit Richard Sloat, Morgan's son, who is at that boarding school in Ohio, I think.
I forget, but yeah, no, that's I've been anticipating that happening, and he's gonna, there's all sorts of ways that could go, because like this is his best friend, but also there's obviously conflicting loyalties because he's Sloat's son. And I'm just not sure. I mean, other than the fact that I'm certain that they're going to meet eventually, I'm not. I see that as being a fun source of conflict and drama.
I can't wait. Knowing what I know about where the book goes from here, I can't wait for you to experience it.
Awesome.
So that is going to do it for our reading this week. We're moving on now to our discussion question. Last week, Matt, what did we ask our listeners?
We asked for your favorite descriptions of otherworldly beauty. And here we have from Walk and Do 22. There are moments of otherworldly beauty throughout fiction. It would be practically impossible to choose one as the best or my favorite. So let me take a few moments to talk about some of the ones I've read recently. Robert McCammon wrote an absolutely magical coming-of-age novel called Boy's Life. Literally everything you might want in a novel is here. Murder, mystery, gunfights, magic, river monsters, dinosaurs, etc. The one particular scene that comes to mind is in the second act when the boys get released from the school on the last day before summer. They race away, sprouted wings, and flew around the sky over and around the town of Zephyr, Alabama. The events are magical, and the prose transports you into those events. Definitely worth a read. That sounds very fun and
Awesome.
and otherworldly and beautiful.
Yeah. Baby Can You Digger Sam says, Walking Dude 22's mention of a boy's life reminded me of my favorite Ray Bradbury book, Dandelion Wine. The book is poetry in its evocative description. There are so many passages to choose from, and I've selected the one where our 12-year-old hero feels alive. Quote, the grass whispered under his body. He put his arm down, feeling the sheath of fuzz on it, and far away, below, his toes creaking in his shoes. The wind sighed over his shelled ears. The world slipped bright over the glassy rounds of his eyeballs like images sparked in a crystal sphere. Flowers were suns and fiery spots of sky strewn through the woodland. Birds flickered like skipping stones across a vast inverted pond of heaven. His breath raked over his teeth, going in ice, coming out fire. Insects shocked the air with electric clearness. 10,000 individual hairs grew a millionth of an inch on his head. He heard the twin heartbeats beating in each ear, the third heartbeat beating in his throat, the two hearts throbbing in his wrist, the real heart pounding in his chest. The million pores of his body opened. I'm really alive, he thought. I never knew it before. Or if I did, I don't remember. End quote. I could have chosen a dozen paragraphs from this book. Bradbury's prose is truly captivates the wonder all around us, the wonder and beauty of each precious moment where we are given that we unfortunately don't slow down to marvel in it.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I read that book when I was a kid, and I feel like it gave me an ability to understand Ray Bradbury in a way that most people don't, just because if you only read his science fiction, you're kind of missing the angle on which he's like this huge romantic and almost like a naturalistic like it was totally unsurprising to later learn that he was sort of anti-technology, because he's like he absolutely like just
sure.
is obsessed with this sort of poetic romanticization of just the natural world and the mundane.
Yeah, I love this because it's not technically otherworldly, right? This is just our world, but the way Bradbury describes it makes it seem otherworldly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right, next, 300-pound pizza queen says, one of the greatest descriptions of an otherworldly beauty would have to be at the end of The Gunslinger and the palaver between Roland and Walter. It's more our world than otherworldly, but just the whole description of the size of the universe really spoke to me and helps me keep perspective on things that really matter. Traffic is bad and I'm going to be late to work. So what? We live on a dewdrop on a blade of purple grass in an alien world. So long as you don't start thinking of not paying taxes because time is an illusion, you'll be all set. Perspective on the world, your world can be truly beautiful. Yeah, no, it's funny. I kind of forgot about the whole purple grass blade thing and how that fits into the greater cosmology of the Dark Tower.
just don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. La 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 la. Just pay your taxes.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Complicated 9519 says, for otherworldly beauty, I'll go with A Court of Mist and Fury's Starfall celebration. Mist and Fury is a book in the long-running series of Court of Thorns and Roses, where Feyre, a human, ends up in the fairy realm. After a bit of world saving, as per usual, she ends up celebrating this wonderful holiday with her friends and lover. Starfall is a night watcher's dream, where the stars fall down to the night court and lights up where it lands, similar to rain, but the star drops glow. This is where the citizens of the Night Court all dance beneath the stars, accompanied with music playing in the streets. At first glance, Starfall looks like its name, a shower of shooting stars in the sky. However, they are actually spirits, as evidenced by the pale green light that splatters Feyre when a spirit lands on her. And then they go on to say, quote, another star crossed the sky, twirling and twisting over itself as if it were reveling in its own sparkling beauty. It was chased by another and another, until a brigade of them were unleashed from the edge of the horizon, like 1,000 archers had loosed them from mighty bows. Wherever they were, people began dancing, swaying, and twirling, some grabbing hands and spinning to the drums, the strings, the glittering harps. That's very beautiful.
Yeah.
I like that.
Love it. Never heard of that, but that sounds cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Pear Jane says, my choices are both Susanna Clark's Piranesi and Aaron Morgenstern's The Starless Sea. The mental imagery with those stories is so stunning and specific that they're immersive. I know what Piranesi's house looks like, and the library in The Starless Sea soars into an impossible underground infinity. I've been there. I've mentioned before that I love Earth-adjacent fantasy, and these books both feature portals. I often don't connect as well with pure fantasy that has no relationship to our Earth, but books like these present an enhanced version of our world. They're both dreamy and concrete, taking all that we find beautiful in real life and adding a sprinkling of fairy dust to make the visions really fly. They hold a promise that if I walk onto the right beach in the right moment, or fall into a rabbit hole, or stumble into the right alley in Brooklyn, I might find such a place of beauty myself. Yeah. I love that. I love that kind of story. We covered Piranesi on the book club last month. It was one of my favorite book club books in recent memory.
Delightful.
And yeah, it's this just fantastically evocative setting, and it's funny how books that are about portals to other worlds tend to be the ones that kind of suck you in. It's just kind of a sleight of hand going on there, I think.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of what I meant by the fact that, slowly but surely the mystery of our world is kind of sucked out of it. Because when I was a kid, I would read books like these and legitimately believe that, like, just around the corner, that I could make a turn down an alley and stumble into a portal and find myself in another world. And, like, slowly you just stop believing that kind of stuff is possible. And that's sad, but it's also, I understand it's like part of growing up, but it's definitely sad in a way.
Yeah, it is kind of sad. I still like to believe that there's a wardrobe somewhere that opens on another world, but it's getting harder and harder to sustain that belief.
Dark Beer Rule says, I think the otherworldly beauty described by C.S. Lewis in his Space Trilogy was really wonderful and obviously memorable, since here I am remembering it all these years later. In Out of the Silent Planet, Professor Ransom is kidnapped. It's funny that his name is Ransom and he's kidnapped.
It is.
And taken to the planet Malacandra, Mars, and his descriptions of the landscape and inhabitants are stunningly beautiful and very interesting. I can never look at otters the same way now. I have not read this book, and I am very intrigued by what that means. In the second book, Paralandra, Professor Ransom travels of his own accord to the titular planet, which is Venus to us, and has to save a beautiful, innocent, and completely naked woman from the machinations of the same earthly bad guys we saw in the previous books. But the floating islands, the tossing green seas, the animals, everything on this planet are described so wonderfully, it made me want to go there. And not just because it's populated by only this beautiful naked women. If you haven't read the series, it's definitely worth it. They're considered classics, and for a good reason. And I sadly haven't. I have not read enough C.S. Lewis, for sure.
Yeah, I it's funny. I forgot about these books completely until you reminded me with this answer, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I've been meaning to read that, or at least part of my brain was, and then most of my brain forgot about it. But anyway, where have I heard the name Paralandra before? Not these books, somewhere else. It's like a reference. It's like somebody's referencing these books, probably.
I don't
I
know.
definitely feel like I've seen or read something recently that had the word Paralander that was like and now that I see it, I realize, oh, that's probably a reference to this. Anyway, that's not
Um,
important. What's important is C.S. Lewis is actually pretty good at these otherworldly types of stories.
it's an opera by Donald Swann and David Marsh based on this novel. It's the title of a song by Circle of Dust, and it's the title of an album, a 1995 album by the band Glass Hammer.
Okay.
So,
Well, one of those things, but
and also an album by Kevin Braheny.
okay.
People really like naming their songs and albums after this thing.
They do. I mean, I think C.S. Lewis probably has a disproportionate number of things named after his stuff, because I remember when I was a kid, there was a band called Silverchair, which is a reference to one of his books as well.
Yeah.
Anyway,
yeah,
good old C.S. Lewis. He wrote the Screwtape Letters, right? The Screwtape Letters are my favorite thing of his, actually.
Yes.
Anyway, moving on. Kingy 1701A says, favorite description of otherworldly beauty for me comes from Blade Runner. Barry's speech at the end not only imbues what is frankly nonsense with beauty, but is the moment when his humanity is undeniable. I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched sea beams glitter in the dark near the Tannhauser Gate. All those moments will be lost in time, like tears in rain. Time to die. Thanks for quoting the whole thing, Kingy. Gave me an excuse to read it, which is...
Ale84001 says, David Lynch has made a career of depicting otherworldly beauty in every frame of celluloid he's ever committed to film. But I have to give a special nod to the single strangest, most glorious avant-garde hour of television ever created, Episode 8 of Twin Peaks: The Return. It's a real mindfucker of an episode, even by Lynch standards. This is pure uncut Lynch injected straight into your veins via your eyeballs and ears. And he summarizes it, but I'm not going to read the summary just in case. In case people don't want to be spoiled.
I haven't seen it, so yeah. Okay.
Lynch excels at making the mundane into the terrifying, but here, with the reins thrown off, he really lets his freak flag fly. That's a total triumph.
Delightful.
Yeah.
It's funny to imagine that Lynch has been like restraining himself for his whole career, and this is him actually not restraining himself.
Having seen the episode he's talking about, yeah.
Fascinating. All right, next we have from Daniel D. I probably wouldn't even be able to think of a decent answer if I hadn't just tackled Piranesi audiobook this weekend. I had this book on my list for a while and wanted to listen to something while taking a psychedelic trip. I remember you lot saying it was like a fever dream and thought it sounded perfect for a wee acid trip. Trying to figure out what was going on whilst tripping was a good time, and those immaculate marble statues were crystal clear in my mind's third eye. The many different descriptions throughout the book were so good. The statues were beautiful, but also left you feeling uneasy at the same time. At one point, Piranesi describes a crowd of statues that appeared to be frozen while staring at the moon, and it gave me Dr. Stone vibes. I'm sure Scott has seen that, what with him being such a big fan of anime and all. Also love the way Clark described the floor with the clouds. I envisioned it like flying with no airplane. It kind of felt like Roland's first look at our world when Eddie was staring out the airplane window. While regular Falcon would think it was weird when Piranesi described the way he did his hair with all the shells and whatnot, I thought that was quite charming, especially the way he thought it was beautiful. Once again, the fact that the Dark Tower has ruined to me for other books reared its head. I kept thinking of different levels of the tower when he was talking about the different halls, and there are other worlds than these throughout this one. Highly recommended that book in general, and for Tower Junkies in particular. Yes, a second ringing endorsement for Piranesi. I hope that more people are going to check it out. Because I don't know what else to say other than I enjoyed the hell out of it. It was a great book.
It's such a good book. Such a good book. Everyone read it.
It's funny the mixture of the idea of altered states of consciousness with reading reminded me of something which is apropos, I think, which is that one time I had insomnia, and a friend suggested that I listen to these like sleep hypnosis things on YouTube, and I listened to one of them, and I went through this whole, like, basically they walk you through this thing of like counting yourself down into a calm state and like doing visualization exercises. And then it walked me into like walking down this spiral staircase into the darkness, and then coming to this like vast underground library. And that was really cool. And it was so cool that when I checked it out the next morning to like listen to that part of the recording again, it wasn't in there. So I had just dreamed all of that, I think. But it was weird, man. It was fucking weird.
That's fucking terrifying.
And it was,
I don't like it. I don't like it.
Like it reminds me very much of this like Piranesi Altered States conversation though, because it kind of felt like I went through a doorway into another place, you know. But it was all in my head.
That's, I mean, cool, but also terrifying.
I mean, it was probably all in my head.
Probably.
As far as you know.
Maybe there is magic in the world. I just need to get real fucked up.
You just need to get fucked up or listen to some YouTube hypnosis tapes.
Or both.
Yeah, sure, man.
Next, we have Jennifer D, who says, I'm not sure about beauty, but there's a story that always filled me with otherworldly wonder. It's a King short story that has always stuck with me, and I sometimes pull it out when I need a quick glimpse out of this place. Mrs. Todd's Shortcut. It's an old Maine codger retelling his experience of traveling the forgotten back roads of his wild home state with a summer lady he caretakered for. He first supposed the possibilities of her seemingly tall tales. Quote, maybe there are a lot of roads all over that are just going begging. Roads with rock walls besides them, real roads with blackberry bushes growing alongside them, and nobody there to eat the blackberries but the birds, and gravel pits with old rusted chains hanging down down in the low curves in front of the entryways. The pits themselves as forgotten as child's old toys with scrum grass growing up their deserted, unremembered sides. Roads that have been forgotten except by the people who live on them and think of the quickest way to get off of them onto the turnpike. When he finally falls under her spell and agrees to tag along on her shortcut, he finds that the roads are so much more than he expected. I got to look into those woods, and holy God, Dave, everything in there was moving. There was grasses waving and plants that was all knotted together so they made faces. I seen something sitting on a squat on a stump that looked like a tree toad, but it was as big as a full-grown cat. I'm always transported by King's description and visual words. I feel like I could close my eyes and open them to be in the places I'm reading about. His characters can be great, but his settings are the magic.
That's great. Mm-hmm. I do actually think King is really good at this. He does it in a way that doesn't really draw attention to itself, which is its own skill, actually. Because I feel like every time I try to write descriptive prose, it's like, oh, and here Matt begins to write descriptive prose. Whereas King, it's just effortless, you know, or it seems effortless.
Yeah, he's fantastic.
Yeah. All right. Steve L says, my first thought was how Galadriel was described in Lord of the Rings. I remember her being described as being beyond beautiful. I then thought of the epic visuals of the other sentient beings in the Hyperion series, especially the last two books. I fell in love with the different types of beings and how different they were while still working together in their world building. The literal otherworldly beauty in the Hyperion series were all the amazing planets. From water to ice, deserts, and beyond, Dan Simmons' descriptions still bring back memories of those worlds years after reading them. Still by far my favorite sci-fi I've ever read. Yet another thing that makes me want to finish the Hyperion books.
Yeah, I think Steve is like our constant drum beater for we need to read more Hyperion. Yeah. And he's probably totally right, and we still haven't done it. So thank you, Steve, for continuing to remind us that we need to finish that damn series.
Yeah, I'm making a note in my little notebook right here. The whole Lothlorien section of Lord of the Rings is probably my favorite bit, by the way, which is where Galadriel is.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Last, we have Sigma, who says Nabokov never wrote fantasy, but he always imbued ordinary life with fantastic prose, in spite of his horrendous protagonists and plots. That I think it makes it count. Speak Memory has such beautiful passages. If not Nabokov, then a bit of narration before you fight Asgore in Undertale. This is a video game that you and I really enjoyed. It says, quote, a strange light fills the room. Twilight is shining through the barrier, end quote. It's a lot better when you work your way to that point of the game. Educated by Tara Westover also has some wonderful prose, also in spite of its horrible incidents and repulsive people. The prologue is especially beautiful. Otherworldly beauty doesn't have to mean fantasy worlds, in my opinion. Otherworldly beauty can be the real life or the love you have for one, which is something I've been blessed with. Pardon if that answer is abstract or indirect. It's not, and I agree with you. Otherworldly beauty doesn't have to be a fantasy world, literal other world. It's just like we talked about with Sam's answer. It's the ability to take something that might not be otherworldly and almost elevate it by your description of it.
Yeah, I agree. Even the scene that spurred this question was basically just Jack walking through like a field, which, you know, it was a sort of a elevated magical experience of a field, but it was still not like, gargoyles coming to life and flying around or anything like that.
Yeah. Great answer, and thank you everyone for those answers. Really wonderful. Sorry I butchered some of your passages. By the time we get to this point of the podcast, I'm so tired, and I'm trying to read fast, and I do bad. So I took these beautiful otherworldly beauty passages and just fucking massacred them.
The eyes do get tired. Yeah.
All right, we've got a new question for next week though, and I think it's a fitting one, Matt. What are we asking next week?
What is your favorite werewolf story? What are, in your opinion, the key elements that make a good werewolf story?
And maybe use those elements in why this is your favorite werewolf story.
Yes. And it is a fun trope, so I look forward to a wide variety of answers.
I love werewolf stories. And King he wrote one very short story about werewolves, and then he's got a werewolf here. The Talisman is not a werewolf story, but it has a werewolf story in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a very Dark Tower in that way. We've got a little bit of a pastiche.
I agree. So that is it for us here this week on Kingslingers. Next week, we are somehow already in part 3 of the book. I don't know how that happened, Matt. This book only has 4 parts, and we're on part 3 already. But here we go. It's going fast. We will be covering chapters 20 through 24 of part 3, A Collision of Worlds.
Awesome. Remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod or over on the subreddit at r/doofmedia.
And if you're not already subscribed to Kingslingers, now is the time to do it. Go into whatever podcatcher you use. I recommend Overcast if you are a Apple user. That's my favorite one.
Me too.
It's really good. Use that one and search for Kingslingers and add us and listen to us, which you're doing already, but listen to us that way because it's better. It's
better experience overall. 10% better. 12% better.
Stop making up numbers.
And if you like any of our shows and you want to support them, then please consider donating to our Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia. This week, special thanks to new patrons Jeff B. and Byron K. Welcome to the community. We hope you enjoy the stuff we have over there on the Patreon. This week, I'm releasing one of the bonus podcast episodes where me and my brother discuss a whole bunch of random crazy stuff. This week we discussed VR and how VR is going to take everything over, and how prior to roughly this week I wasn't that excited about VR, but now I am.
Ooh. So. I can't wait to listen to that. And you also get a bunch of other bonus things, some things we call Doof After Darks, which are just us talking about random crap. There's no real topic. It's just random. I'm saying this now because I haven't recorded yet, but I really want to do it. Matt and I are going to talk about Baby Shark.
Baby Shark.
Because I've been listening to this Baby Shark song because I have a baby. And I've got some... This is a weird as fuck song, Matt. I've got to do some close analysis of Baby Shark. So that's going to be on the After Dark next week.
This is going to be fun because I'm sure that I've heard this song 1,000 times, but I actually only know like the main chorus. I don't actually know like the actual song. So
you'll see, Matt.
I'll have to listen. Should I listen before the episode or should I wait till the episode?
No.
Okay.
You should wait.
Okay.
You should wait.
All right. Good.
Of course, if you cannot afford to donate to us right now, that is absolutely okay. You can help us out by sharing this podcast, and as always, by leaving a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or whatever other platform you use that allows ratings and reviews. This week's Spotlight review comes from Blah, who gives us 5 stars and says, "Just found and is my new addiction. I stumbled on this podcast after running out of content due to COVID-related constant listening. I had previously read the Dark Tower series, but reading it with Scott and Matt presents an entirely different reading. I can't help but feel part of a larger quartet when listening, especially with the world feeling less connected. This feels like friends gathered round a campfire during an entirely too long night of 2020. Love it." Yeah, and this is not an old review. It's a fairly new review, and that's because 2020 is still happening.
Yeah.
It's March again, Matt.
Yeah,
it's March again.
It's the 3rd March of 2020. the first of the third March 2020. All right. What a great review. We really appreciate that. Y'all continue to make us feel very appreciated with these lovely reviews.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, folks, that's it. We'll see you right back here next week for more Talisman, long days, and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.